know about.
Okay, so you can have it up, you just can't have it on the building.
Uh-huh.
Okay?
Okay, so somebody has to hold it then. That's what
Yeah.
you're saying? Okay.
Okay?
But you have come 5 minutes early.
Huh?
It's just
Okay.
been so long trying to get it to stay up.
Yeah, okay. Well, two people have to hold it.
Just any signs that you have, if they don't give you permission or you didn't apply for a permit, you have to hold it up.
Okay.
All right?
It's a federal building?
Uh-huh.
Isn't this our building?
Yeah, you're gonna have to go to court on that one.
God, that's
I'm
sad.
worried about the courts.
That's sad.
Good luck, guys.
All
Okay.
right, thank you. Okay.
I thought they would come by.
I'm not surprised that. I am surprised that the police officers
It's a bad neighborhood, so be careful. Oh, really? You have noticed?
I thought you're here to protect us.
Yeah, aren't you going to be here?
We'll be down there.
Okay. It's a difficult neighborhood. But that's what's happening in this country, unfortunately.
And those three will be over there.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to go live right now here. Okay, you ready? Stand by.
Hello. Hello.
Hold on.
Hello. Hello. Okay. Hello. Hello. Okay. No, that's okay. This is good. Okay, this is Steve Zeltzer. We're here today in front of the San Francisco Federal Building in a speak out against the attempt of the United States government to extradite Julian Assange from Britain to the United States. And also to defend Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, who face terrorism and torture by the British government. Okay. We put it across here, around here. Okay.
Hold up, hold up.
Okay. Okay, that's good. This action has been called by Bay Action Committee to Free Julian Assange, and there are going to be rallies in other parts of the country and other parts of the world to demand the freedom of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And the issue of Julian Assange is an issue of free speech. It's an issue of the right to communicate, and it's the issue of against the repression and the war crimes of the United States government, which is engaging in war crimes all over the world. And what we know is that, in fact, while they're going after Julian Assange, they're not going after the crimes that WikiLeaks exposed, the war crimes in Iraq, the war crimes of Hillary Clinton in overturning the government in Guatemala. Those are the real war crimes, and those were exposed by WikiLeaks. And that's why the UK want to extradite him to the United States, and that's why Sweden would like to extradite him, because these governments in the United States and Sweden and UK have blood on their hands. They're involved in repressing democratic rights, and the use of espionage laws by the United States government, by the Trump administration against Julian Assange, is an attack not just on Julian Assange. Every journalist and any journalist around the world can be extradited for violating the espionage laws of the United States. And we know today, as a matter of fact, President Trump accused the press of being corrupt and liars. He's called the press scum. He's encouraged his Nazi-like campaign rallies to attack journalists, physically attack journalists. We're talking about a wannabe dictator, a wannabe fascist, and using the laws, the espionage laws of the United States to attack Julian Assange is changed the atmosphere in this country. So more and more journalists and publishers understand that if they use it against Julian Assange, it can be used against anyone, any journalist, any whistleblower, any publishing company. So we're here to speak out. We're here to build a movement to defend Julian Assange and to demand that he be free, as well as Chelsea Manning. And we're also here to say that the real criminals are running these governments. That's really the reality. It's not Julian Assange who is trying to get the truth out. It was these criminal governments that violate the law and keep people unaware of the laws. That's why they were so angry. And we're talking about Democrats and Republicans in the United States who've called for the imprisonment of Julian Assange. Some have called for his murder, accused him of being a terrorist. Well, I would say the big terrorists are in the U.S. government right now. Look at how they're supporting the Saudi Arabians who are committing genocide against the people of Yemen. That's the kind of information that WikiLeaks has released. I mean, these are WikiLeaks have released the real crimes of the United States government, the real crimes of the corporations who run this country, really, the billionaires. That's who Julian Assange was exposing. That's why they want him extradited to the United States and to be put away. And we're here to save him, to defend him, and stop the torture of him in the British prison. They put him in a high security prison where he has health problems. They're not properly taking care of him. And the other thing that is important to understand, it's not just Julian Assange. Right here in San Francisco, Brian Carmody, who was a journalist, independent journalist, who was registered by the police department in San Francisco, was actually his office was raided, his home was raided, and they said he had been in a criminal conspiracy to release police documents around the death of Jeff Adachi, the former public defender. Now, the fact of the matter is there's a California shield law that protects journalists in California. So they tried to violate, they actually had a criminal conspiracy, the police department, to violate the California shield law. I mean, and they argued that he was in a criminal conspiracy to steal documents. Well, the fact of the matter is they lied, as the U.S. government is lying. He was attacked and he was raided because they wanted to stop him as a whistleblower, that he released this information. Now, I don't agree about the release of documents by the police department improperly, but why aren't they arresting police officers in San Francisco who were the ones that gave the information to Brian Carmody? That's a question we have to ask. The police who violated the rules, they're not being arrested. They're not being arrested. And I was at a police commission hearing here in San Francisco, and guess what? The person that's going to investigate this is the executive director of the police commission, which has been involved in covering up crimes by the police department. So here you have the police really investigating themselves. This is the kind of contradictions and conflicts of interest that you have. This government is really not interested, even in San Francisco, in exposing the corruption, exposing the real crimes. So Brian Carmody's case is connected very much to Julian Assange, is connected to other whistleblowers. And then we had, very importantly, and a very dangerous threat, the Australian government, which engaged in a raid on Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Because guess what? They released crimes about Australian troops in Afghanistan. Illegal activity, war crimes by Australian troops. What do? They don't arrest the Australian troops who are engaged in war crimes. They raid the offices of Australian Broadcasting Corporation. So here again is an example of the Australian government covering up the real war crimes that are going on and arresting the whistleblowers, arresting the journalists. They want to destroy all journalists. They want to intimidate them, threaten them, and terrorize them. So they are not releasing information. And we're here today to say we have to defend Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Chelsea Manning! Free Chelsea Manning! Jail the real war criminals! Jail the real war criminals! Jail the real war criminals! And I think the other issue is that it's becoming more and more apparent to the American people who know about Julian Assange that he's been used as a target because the corrupt government doesn't want this information out. More and more people don't believe the press. They don't believe the corporate press. Well, it's interesting. Rachel Maddow and other journalists were calling for blood against Julian Assange. He's a Russian agent. He's a Russian agent. We got to put him in jail. He's cost us the election of Hillary Clinton, who was another war criminal, who was involved and exposed in WikiLeaks, her illegal activity around the world and on Honduras, overthrowing a government. That's what Hillary Clinton was involved in. But these journalists who were calling for blood against Julian Assange, who wanted him arrested and extradited, all of a sudden the espionage charges and comes and they wake up and they say, well, we may be next. And if it was up to Trump, they would be arrested. Let's face it, Trump would like to arrest a lot of people. He would have liked to arrest journalists to expose his corruption. So all the many journalists now, the Washington Post and the New York Times, are saying that you cannot use espionage laws, but they're not calling for the freeing of Julian Assange. They should demand the charges be dropped because they themselves published the same documents that Julian Assange released through WikiLeaks. They could be charged right now with espionage under the same laws that they're prosecuting Julian Assange for. But they refuse to call for the freedom of Julian Assange. Why? Because they want to be covering it up as well. They don't want the truth to come out because these corporate entities have been engaged in war crimes themselves. The war in Iraq was a war crime. And these newspapers like the New York Times were propagating war propaganda to tell people there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Who propagated that? The New York Times. They had Judith Miller, a journalist, so-called quote-unquote journalist, propagating the lies that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And that whole escapade, the whole war crime of the United States, bombing Iraq, forcing millions of people to flee, killing hundreds of thousands of people, that is a war crime. That was an illegal war. And the criminals in the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress who voted for that should be on trial themselves because they were involved in a war crime. But you won't hear that in the media. They don't want to talk about that because they themselves are complicit in war crimes. That's why they were angry about Julian Assange. They were angry that the WikiLeaks exposed Hillary Clinton's real role and Podesta, the rigging of the election. They talk about Russia. What about the Democrats rigging the election against Bernie Sanders? They don't want people to know about that. Blame the Russians. Blame the Russians. This is the world economic crisis now. The effort to blame China, to have trade war against China, to blame Iran, to have trade war against Iran, to have sanctions. These are all crimes. These are an imperialist crisis, a decline of the U.S. empire, and whipping up antagonism and warmongering against other countries. The United States is involved in war crimes around the world. The United States itself is involved in overturning elections. You look at the Ukrainian election. The United States spent billions of dollars in Ukraine to overturn the election. Apparently, it's okay for the United States to overthrow governments. It's not okay for other countries to intervene in elections. So we're talking again about a double standard. And that's another reason that they hate Julian Assange, because the lies that propagated by the U.S. government and the corporate media exposed the real role of the United States, exposed criminal activity by U.S. government officials to cover up war crimes, to intervene in countries all over the world. That's what we're really talking about. We're talking about the right of the American people to know the role of this government. Why? I mean, we were warned by the police here that this is a dangerous neighborhood. This is a dangerous neighborhood. Well, you know why? Because they've been cutting health care. They've been cutting mental health. People can't find housing in San Francisco, but they have trillions of dollars for war. This is what's going on. This country is spending trillions for war, but they can't take care of the people right here in San Francisco, right next to the federal building. That's really what's going on. That's the crime of this country, that people are dying because they can't get health care. That's the crime, that people are paupers when they get out of college because they have to borrow money. Those are the real crimes, while the billionaires really skim off this country. They want wars because they make money. They profiteer on wars. That's what the United States government is about. Democrats and Republicans, including Pelosi, are voting for billions for war, are voting to support Israel, billions to Israel, so they can occupy the people of Palestine and harass them and terrorize them. Those are the real crimes, and that is something that we have to address in the defense of Julian Assange. It's not just about Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. It's about the real war crimes that are going on in this country, against people in this country, against people around the world. These are the real war crimes, and that's what we have to raise in this issue. The real threat is not Julian Assange. The threat is that he's opening people's eyes up to the crimes of U.S. imperialism. That's the real threat. They don't want people to know what the crimes are of this U.S. government, how they conspire around the world to overthrow governments, how they support right-wing and fascist groups. They talk about anti-Semitism in this country. Well, the United States and Israel are supporting Nazis in Eastern Europe. They're helping to train Nazis. Now, is that a crime? Why would the U.S. government support Nazis around the world? Why? We have to ask that. They don't want to talk about that. They want to spend more money to train military in Honduras. They want the Mexican government to attack the migrants. Who forced the migrants to come? It was the United States by the policies in Central America. That's what and Hillary Clinton was involved personally in overthrowing the government of Honduras. She was involved in setting up a military dictatorship that has been used to terrorize the people of Honduras. You won't hear that. When they talk about migrants and immigration, they never talk about who caused the migration. NAFTA was a cause of migration. NAFTA privatized the lands, the ejidos, and forced the farmers, indigenous people off the land. They privatized the railroads, they privatized the transportation, and then they blame the people when they leave. But their economic policies caused directly by the United States, by its economic policies. So we're here today to send hands off Julian Assange, free Chelsea Manning, free all journalists, stop the attack on journalists in this country and around the world, from San Francisco to Britain. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Okay, so we're going to have some speakers now, and we'd like, okay, so welcome. I'll hold it.
Okay. Stand around there.
Stand here.
Stand around the mark.
Okay, be careful.
Say your name too. Say your name.
If you want, they don't have to.
Oh, Trisha Beretta,
Okay.
and
You kind of hold it. Oh, let me hold it.
and I'm a beginner. Okay, all right.
I'll hold it.
Are you going to hold it? Okay. Okay, Julian Assange's plight is the sharpest expression of a turn by governments around the world towards authoritarianism and police state measures. The destruction of all protection of rules of law, which is what we're now witnessing, is essential to the establishing of a totalitarian state. A host of political forces are responsible for this turn. Chief among them are the Democrats, the Republicans, and the official establishment in the United States, which has viciously pursued the WikiLeaks founder for revealing their crimes against the world's population. The establishment media, including KPFA and Amy Goodman, has played a shameful role, relentlessly slandering or disappearing, in the case of Amy Goodman, Assange, downplaying the threats that he faces and their significance, and solidarizing, I don't know if that's a word, but I couldn't find any synonym, but solidarizing themselves with the state persecutors. A host of organizations that once claimed to defend Assange have abandoned him, signaling their support for imperial war and repression. We, the people, must realize that what we live with today, we will suffer tomorrow. From the World Socialist website comment section of May 30th, when Julian Assange was transferred to the Belmarsh Prison's medical wing, the defense of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning is inexorably wound with our future survival. Assange and Manning have put their heads above the parapet and told us all loud and clear that the enemy is coming. And so, for us, is it an obligation etched in our very fiber of our being to defend the messenger and not to help shoot him? Sarah Harrison has pointed out that this is our data, our information, and our history. We must fight to own it. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange.
We are all Julian Assange.
Oh, Julian Assange. Thank you. Thank you, Tricia. Thank you. So, as we all know, the United States is engaged in war crimes around the world. It's bombing people around the world. It's killing people around the world in Okinawa. And another place the United States is involved in is in Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States. And the people of Puerto Rico have been fighting against the attack of the United States, the colonization. And we have with us Ricardo Ortiz, who's going to talk about the struggle of Puerto Rico and the connection to Julian Assange. Welcome, Ricardo.
I wish. Okay. I wish there was more energy. Come on. Free Julian Assange.
Stand at the mark.
Oh, right here. Okay. Yes. We are here demanding that Julian Assange will not be deported to Sweden and vis-a-vis the United States, because Julian Assange is a fighter for freedom. He exposed part of what this military-industrial complex of the United States and other imperialist allies are doing around the world, particularly in the third world. So Julian Assange is a hero. The Swedish government is not an inoffensive government. Its government exports weapons to tyrannical regimes. Sweden is among the first 15 arms exporters. And if you don't believe me, just look at a journal called Jane Defense Weekly, which is a journal specializing in military matters. So Julian Assange is being repressed, detained, because all these imperialist powers, including the European Union, particularly France, Britain, etc., they do have corporate interests abroad. The country of France have intervened in Africa more than 40 times, military more than 40 times since 1970. In Mali, in the Ivory Coast, Chad, and I can go on and on the list. And it competes with the United States in terms of military assistance. And there are like 10 French military bases in the continent of Africa. So, of course, these imperialist countries, and Britain also, which is a major weapons exporter, its intelligence services train other repressive forces such as the Saudi security services and so on. They don't want a heroic person like Julian Assange freed, because they themselves have their very dirty laundry list. And this country not only commits crimes abroad and outside of this, outside of this country. This regime right here, like Fidel Castro defined them in an interview in 1988, is a one-party system, one liberal and one conservative. But, it's both of these parties the ones that are parties of war, colonization, and repression. Both Democrats and Republicans, the liberals and the conservatives. Now we have supposedly another liberal, peace-loving hero, and they call it Bernie Sanders. Well, I got to tell you something about that new hero and the new great white hope. That man supported the bombing of Yugoslavia in the 90s, for you to know. And then that very same war criminal was one of the senators that signed the resolution supporting the blockade of Gaza a few years ago. So I want you to know that, if you don't know. And he's trying to get, surprisingly, F-35, the most modern fighter bomber that the United States have built for, listen to this, the Vermont National Guard. I wonder to whom Vermont wants to wage war against. Ask Bernie Sanders that when he comes to town. All of you that vote Democrat and vote for the goddamn lesser of the evils. It's time for understanding that all capitalist parties are enemies of the working class, and we have to build a working, socialist, authentic party. Hell with social democracy, hell with the liberals and reactionaries, all the same. I just want to end this. I just want to end with this. Right here in the United States, the U.S. government is investing in so much surveillance and security apparatus, even in these cities. And they have brought Israeli police to train the police forces of Oakland, San Francisco, and many other cities in the United States. Why do you think that is happening? Because they expect a big class war in this country, because we, the people, are starting to get sick of what's going on. So, you know, this is happening right here as we speak, and we cannot ignore that. And particularly, if you voted for these liberal mayors that their forces are killing black and Latino youth, well, right here, crimes are committed. You don't have to go very far to see what's going on. Pay attention. So the only alternative and the only solution is socialism. My last sentence will be this. This is my last sentence. In my home country, Puerto Rico, which was occupied by the United States in 1898, they right now have this fiscal control board sucking the blood of the working class and the poor down there. And let me tell you something, you liberals that vote for the Democrats, the one that signed the law, Promesa, that created that fiscal control board was none other than Barack Obama, the reporter-in-chief, the one that did launch more drone attacks than even the two administrations of George W. Bush combined. Hell with the capitalist parties, long live the working class, long live the red flag of socialism.
Thank you, Ricardo. Yeah.
Respecting the gentleman's right to speak and agreeing with a lot of it, but I have to say, I personally saw Bernie Sanders in the media saying he supports Julian Assange. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's news that I haven't heard, but anyway, if that's true, that's good, because I think that Julian Assange should be supported and should be defended. So again, we're here today in San Francisco to defend Julian Assange, to defend Chelsea Manning, to defend all whistleblowers, and to demand justice and human rights for Julian Assange. Julian Assange is in a security prison, a high security prison in Britain, and he's being tortured there. He doesn't get the kind of treatment he deserves. And we have to say that it's not an accident, it's not a mistake. They would like to kill Julian Assange. He's a freedom fighter who has actually stood for the people of the world. Julian Assange, like Edward Snowden, like Chelsea Manning, has put his life in danger by WikiLeaks, by releasing this information. And the hypocrisy of the media in this country, when they actually used Julian Assange and WikiLeaks information and then attacked him and said that he should be arrested. And there are many people, even at the San Francisco Labor Councils, who said he was a rapist. He was never charged with rape. That was a frame-up of Julian Assange. So we know that this government is lying. We know that there was a frame-up of Julian Assange, and we're here to demand that the extradition stop. We're here to demand that he be free to go back to Australia or go wherever he wants. To demand that WikiLeaks be defended. The people of this country have a right to know what is in WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks have exposed the crimes, the war crimes, and the collusion of the U.S. government and corporations to take away our democratic rights. They don't want free speech. They want a controlled media. If you look at the media in this country, who owns it? Who owns it? A small group of people, a small group of billionaires really control the media in this country. So there seems to be an arrest here.
Yeah, some woman is not doing anything, unfortunately,
Yeah.
so the cops are.
Yeah, this country is, videotape that. I mean, you know, that's, again, you know, what is going on in this country right here in San Francisco right now is an example of where we're at. You know, I mean the arrest of people, poor people, working class, African American people. There's not enough housing, and imagine the money that they spent on Julian Assange in front of the Ecuadorian consulate. Millions of dollars trying to basically keep him there or arrest him. So we're here to defend Julian Assange. We're here to defend the people of this country who are under attack, the people who are arrested and harassed and killed right here in San Francisco. They've always got more money in the budget for the police in San Francisco. They've always got more money for the military. And who voted for more money in the military in this country? The Democrats and Republicans voted for more money for the military. What is going on in this country? What is going on? The stock goes up when they do more bombings. They want to bomb Iran. There's money to be made by bombing other countries. They want more militarization. In fact, today in the White House, this war criminal Trump joined with the Polish president, and they said they're going to buy F-35 jets that they want to militarize. This is while the people of Poland are suffering, have economic problems. They want to buy more military weapons to surround Russia. And they promised when the Soviet Union collapsed that they would not militarize on the border. They're pushing towards a world war. That's really what's going on. And that's what Julian Assange and other whistleblowers have been exposing. They don't want these truths to come out, and that's why they've been attacking Julian Assange. Carol, would you like to say something? Okay. Carol Seligman.
Do I hold it?
Yeah, I'll hold it.
Okay.
Stand up.
Yes.
I have two things to say. The first thing is that when the U.S. Went into Iraq and Afghanistan, we didn't know what was going on. The American people didn't really know what was going on. There was a huge demonstration of 250,000 here in San Francisco to say, don't go into Iraq. But I would say, especially because the media was hyping up the war and lying about the justifications for the war that the US government was giving about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction, that most of the people were not aware of what actually was going on in the country, in Iraq. But Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and Chelsea Manning showed us exactly what was going on, that the war, the bombing, was against civilians, against journalists, against children. That was an amazing truth that was told by Julian Assange, by WikiLeaks, and it educated anyone who could hear about it and listen to it, which probably wasn't too many of the American people because the media kept lying, but it educated all of us. It educated a large anti-war movement. It educated people who were willing to question what the US government was doing. I can't think of a more courageous, exemplary act than to tell the truth about a vicious war against people, against civilians in Iraq with no justification whatsoever. And I think because we don't have a draft and many people volunteer for the military without knowing what they're getting into, some of them are victims and do not see other opportunities in their life and think that if they serve in the military, they'll get some perks from it, they'll get some education from it. I think that when people like that, not gung-ho patriots necessarily, but people who don't know what's going on and see the military as some kind of alternative, when the truth comes out about war crimes that the US government is committing in all of our names under false pretenses and lies, I think perhaps some people who would have joined the military did not join the military. That is a tremendous accomplishment. So I have nothing but praise for WikiLeaks and Julian Assange for telling the truth showing the collateral murder video that Chelsea Manning gave to WikiLeaks when she couldn't get it published in any kind of mainstream media that she tried to get it published in. She sent it to WikiLeaks. Those are really admirable acts, and we owe tremendous debt to Chelsea Manning and to Julian Assange for truth-telling. No good deed goes unpunished in this society. Truth-telling is not something that is valued. People like Kissinger win the Nobel Prize. War criminals are the ones who are built up and admired by the wealthy and powerful who run this society. But we have the duty to tell the truth about who real heroes are, and telling the truth about war. There's nothing greater that you could do. In this society, our government actually arrests and jails people for leaving water in the desert for migrants. That's illegal. But telling the truth about war crimes, that's beyond the pale. I have one other thing I want to say, which is that an anti-war leader in Japan named Fumiaki Hoshino, he was a student leader in the Vietnam anti-war movement in Japan. They were working, the Japanese student anti-war movement, this was in the 70s, was working against the US using Okinawa as military base for napalm bombing of Vietnam. So they were engaged in a militant mass struggle against US war crimes back then. Hoshino was framed because a police officer was killed in the fighting around in one of these demonstrations. Hoshino did not kill him. There wasn't evidence that he did, but he was in prison for over 40 years, and he was denied health care. Japanese prisons, I don't know if this is for everyone, but for political prisoners like Hoshino, who was housed in a far northern part of Japan where there's no heat in the prison in the winter and no cooling against intense heat in the summer. Terrible conditions, no health care. He just died after being operated on for liver cancer, which the prison never treated him for in a timely way. He might have survived if he had had the care that was required for something like that. It was a survivable disease, but the prison system killed him. We have to say that. The prison system killed him. The prison system in Britain is denying proper medical care to Julian Assange. And Mumia Abu-Jamal, we all know who he is, America's foremost political prisoner. He is in a serious medical emergency caused by the prison, because a lot of the problems he's suffering right now are due to the prison totally ignoring the fact that for many years, actually for decades, he had hepatitis C, totally curable disease, but they didn't diagnose it, they didn't treat it until just 2 years ago. He's cured of the hepatitis C, but all the things that come with it, like cirrhosis of the liver, that's still there. This is another person who he's in danger of being killed by the prison authorities. This is the treatment of prisoners political prisoners all around the imperialist world, and we have to oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And that is an example of political prisoners. I mean, Mumia Abu-Jamal was a journalist. He was writing about the role of the police, the corrupt Philadelphia Police Department. And that's one of the reasons they wanted to kill him. And they still want to kill him because he was, again, a truth teller. He was telling what was really going on in the police department. And we have an incident right only a few feet from us today of an African-American woman who's apparently being arrested by the police. What was her crime? What did she do? I mean, the real criminals, Nancy Pelosi is a real war criminal. Why aren't they going up and arresting her? Why don't they charge her and Trump together with war crimes? No, they go after poor people, African-American people, people who don't have money, who can't afford lawyers. I mean, the United States has the largest prison system in the world, 2 million people in prison. Why are they in prison? Slave labor. I mean, it's a prison industry. They profit from prison. Like capitalism profits from war, they profit from prisons. Let's build more prisons. The migrants who are forced here by the United States, policies in Mexico and Central America, come here and they make prisons. They make money off them. They build private prisons for these immigrants who are forced into this country. This is really what's going on. This rally for Julian Assange taking place next to the incarceration of an African-American young woman. What was her crime? What was her real crime? Being an American, being an African-American poor, that was her crime. That was her crime in this country. If you're poor, if you're African-American, you go to jail, you go to prison. And the people who run this country, who run the system, who are the real criminals, they get off scot-free. They're given accolades. They're giving accolades that they're doing wonderful things. This is really the reality of American capitalism right now. The real war criminals are running this country, are running the United Kingdom and Sweden, and the poor people, the working people are the ones that are put in jail. The racism, the rampant racism in the United States, the attack on immigrants, the attack on African Americans, the attack on Latinos, the attack on Jews by Nazis, who President Trump, criminal Trump said equated the Nazis with the people who were fighting the Nazis. That's really what's going on. So are there any other speakers who would like to speak? Okay, David.
Thank you. All right, so we have now 17 Espionage Act charges against this editor, publisher. And what is the theory here? The theory is that such actions as communicating with a source, asking a source to provide more information, communicating with a source in a means in order to avoid the source being apprehended, that is, by using encryption, by using a Dropbox system online, that this is tantamount to espionage. And let's not forget that that first charge, the 18th charge that was supposedly computer hacking, the one that made the mainstream media wipe their brow and go, oh, okay, I guess that doesn't apply to us. That charge extensively quoted the Espionage Act. That charge was supposedly for computer hacking, but was in fact for helping the source, that is Bradley Manning at the time, helping the source cover their own tracks. All right? So this theory of espionage is the first time that a journalist has been threatened with prosecution, and now that it's started, this is beginning to spread all throughout the world. We've got 5 cases in France of aggressive actions taken towards journalists under a law that is prosecuting people for attacks on national defense secrets. Right? We've got 4 journalists in Australia, including the main national broadcaster, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And they are being prosecuted under, guess what? Espionage charges. an espionage law that was passed late last year with the claim that it needed to be passed because the Russians were interfering with the elections down there. And we've even had a case here in San Francisco of sledgehammers being taken to a door and materials being taken from a journalist because that journalist was reporting on a police report that the police didn't want reported on. Now, it looks to me like if we've got this rash spreading through the Western world right now, then that means the powers that be are extremely confident. They're confident that at this point, the last vestiges of our independent media can be shut down. They're confident that they can close down all possibilities for investigative journalism based on documents that they deem secret. Assange's great crime was that he had the antidote for this. The antidote was what he calls scientific journalism. Journalism based on making the documents on which the articles have been written available so that we can check them for ourselves and so that it's possible to fight off this onslaught of propaganda that is pouring on our heads constantly. So I guess I'll just end by saying that we really have to make sure that this man is not extradited, is not prosecuted, because if he is, and if investigative journalism becomes espionage, I think the last doors will be closed as far as our possibility to know what is going on with our governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. So we're here again today. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Chelsea Manning! Free Chelsea Manning! Free all journalists! Stop killing journalists! When we look at the murder of journalists around the world, look at the United States and Iraq where they bombed a building. They shelled a building of journalists, and they said they didn't know about it. Do people remember that? That was a war crime. Shelling a building where there were journalists in it during the war. I mean, this is something that people should be on trial for. They should go to prison for. What happened? Nothing. It's covered it up. And let's look at the journalists in Palestine who are being targeted by Israeli troops. They're killing journalists. They're murdering journalists who are trying to cover what is going on in Palestine. Those are war crimes. And guess what? No one is prosecuted. The Israeli government, in fact, is welcomed as a great government by the United States and given billions of dollars. The Democrats and Republicans give more money to Israel for the good work that they're doing, quote unquote good work. And they're incarcerating in a concentration camp the Palestinian people and stealing their land with our money, with tax dollars from the United States. These are war crimes. And Kamala Harris, the Democrats. I mean, you know, the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi here and Dianne Feinstein are voting for war crimes. They're voting for more money for the military. Who does that money benefit? War profiteers, people who make money from war. Dianne Feinstein's husband, Richard Blum, had a business of construction, military construction. And guess what? She was in charge of the committee for military construction in the Senate. She was actually voting for her husband's business. This is a war business for profiteers. These people are personally corrupt. They're personally criminals. And yet, the person they go after is Julian Assange? No way. No way. The real war criminals are the ones who should be on trial, not Julian Assange. The reason they're angry about Julian Assange and Edward Snowden is because they're telling the truth to the people of the world. That's the reason. So if there are other speakers that would like to speak, here, open mic. This is your opportunity. Be brave. Okay. I'll hold it. I'll hold it.
I think in the spirit of revealing what is being hidden, I think there's certain things that a lot of the left is not looking at, and it's actually being looked at more by the alt-right and being docked over here in Silicon Valley from being talked about. And that's not all vaccines, but abusive vaccines, along with, dare we say, chemtrails, geoengineering. Let's just ask ourselves, if the military, the Pentagon, could control the weather, would they do it? And maybe that is why we are in war, from that, going into another fire season. We are being poisoned. And I don't think it's a stretch to say it's planned genocide. Let's find a way we can talk about it. It's a very tricky thing. But right now, it's more the alt-right that's got the guts to talk about it, like to stop the Fed. I went to the Fed 100th anniversary. It was almost all libertarians. And we are fighting each other, and we should be talking with each other, not docking. And I live in Berkeley. We have Trumpsters come to town to talk about free speech. And we got a lot of people covering their faces, and we don't know who they are, stopping them. And I think the irony in the revolution begins at home. And then maybe we see change, like what just happened freeing this woman here. We've got to act.
Okay, and there was the woman that was going to be arrested here was freed by the people who came to the Julian Assange rally. So I would say that that's a victory. What was that woman guilty of? Let's give a hand to the people who helped free her right here at this rally. I mean, as I said earlier, they should be arresting Nancy Pelosi. They should be arresting Trump. They should be arresting Dianne Feinstein. Instead, they're spending the time on poor African-American women. And in this district we're in, you look at the dystopian of San Francisco, the great wealth in San Francisco, the billionaires with the IPOs at Uber. And at the same time, people dying in the streets, people in tents, people not able to get health care. This is capitalism USA. This is the richest city in the world that has billionaires, more billionaires per person than any other city in the world, and people are dying in the streets. This is what's going on in this country. The war against the working class, the war against the poor, the war against the African Americans. That is what they don't want people to know about. And Julian Assange, in developing WikiLeaks, exposed these war crimes, exposed the role of the United States and other imperialist countries on the crimes around the world. They want now, Trump wants the Mexican government, Obrador, to set 6,000 troops on the border of Mexico, to blame the migrants who've been forced out of, have been driven out of Honduras and other countries, El Salvador, because of U.S. wars. I mean, you talk about the rise of fascism around the world. It's the United States that bombed Iraq, that forced millions of people in Iraq and Syria to leave, to go to Europe. And I was in Syria when they were arriving. Thousands and thousands of people were escaping the wars. And who caused these wars? Who's responsible for these wars? It's the U.S. capitalism. It's Nancy Pelosi who voted for the wars. These Democrats are voting for war. They're voting for crimes against the people of the world. That's the reality. That's the reality. And that's why they were so angry with Julian Assange, because WikiLeaks was exposing their crimes. And what do? Blame the Russians. 24 hours on TV. It's the Russians here. It's the Russians there. The Russians are everywhere. They're under the pillow. Watch out for the Russians, you know. This is for a country that is involved in overthrowing governments around the world. There are over 80 governments that the United States has been involved in overthrowing. Do they take responsibility for that? Hell no. But blame the Russians. This empire, U.S. imperialist empire, is going down. It's going down. They're attacking China now and Asia. We should blame the Chinese. Who invested in China? Who made China an economic power? It was the people workers of China, but it was U.S. companies who wanted to make more profit. I mean, nobody dragged American multinationals to go to China, GM and Ford and all these companies. Nobody forced them to go to China. They went there to profit off the exploitation of the Chinese working people. That's why they went to China, and they get blamed. I mean, the Chinese people have developed Huawei, they've developed technology, and then they get blamed for it, and we tell other countries not to buy their technology? What hypocrisy, what duplicity. These people are a pack of liars. They're politically bankrupt, they're duplicitous, and they're liars. These are the real war criminals. These are the real propagandists. They attack Julian Assange as the war criminals, and they are the war criminals. That's what we're really talking about in this country. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Edward Snowden. Or free Chelsea Manning. Free all journalists. Free all whistleblowers. And the unions of the San Francisco Labor Council did pass a resolution to defend Julian Assange, but we have to get the rest of the labor movement on board, because it's not just Julian Assange that's threatened. They want to arrest a lot of journalists. They would like to arrest all kinds of journalists who are exposing the corruption and the crimes of this government. That's why the press, some of the press who were formerly supporting the arrest of Julian Assange, have changed their tune. Now all of a sudden they're worried about being charged with espionage. And if we look at the law, the fact is the U.S. government could charge the Washington Post and the New York Times with espionage. They could go in and arrest them right now. They could go in and arrest them because they did the same thing that Julian Assange did. That's why it's a crime. This charge of espionage is a fraudulent thing. The real people, the real criminals, are the people that run the U.S. government. That's really what's going on. And we are here today to demand the freedom of Julian Assange, to demand the freedom of Chelsea Manning, to say hands off journalists, defend our free speech. It's not just about Julian Assange, it's about the right of the American people to know what's going on in this country under our very noses. When you look at the money, the wealth that this country spends on militarization, on bombing people, illegal wars around the world, and who is arrested for committing these war crimes? Julian Assange? They want Julian Assange arrested when this country is involved in war crimes every day with these flights, with these drones bombing people, bombing even American citizens are being bombed. So they don't care whether you're an American citizen. If you challenge the United States, you are responsible. So as I said earlier, the San Francisco Labor Council passed a resolution. There was a debate on it, but it did pass a resolution to defend Julian Assange. It's the only labor body in the United States to take a stand for Julian Assange, and I thank them, the Labor Council, for doing that. And the delegate that put that on the table at the San Francisco Labor Council was Roger Scott, who's from AFT 2121, formerly the president of the local teachers at City College, which they're also trying to destroy by cutting the classes and laying off people. So welcome, Roger Scott.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here. By the way, quick correction. I supported this resolution, but I was not the one who authored it. That was one of our comrades who's an active member of the Social and Economic Justice Committee of the Labor Council. Okay, as Steve said, I'm a delegate of the American Federation of Teachers to the San Francisco Labor Council, and I'm co-chair of the Social and Economic Justice Committee of the Labor Council. We passed this resolution in support of the defense of whistleblower and journalist Julian Assange on February the 11th of this year. Whereas Julian Assange has helped expose the role of the U.S. and other governments of war crimes and violations of international law, and whereas there is a systematic effort by the U.S. government to harass, repress, and jail reporters and whistleblowers who expose corruption and criminal activities by government officials, and whereas U.S. politicians have called for the murder and torture of Julian Assange to silence him, and whereas the Pacifica Radio Network, Daniel Ellsberg, Oliver Stone, and others have called for his defense and freedom, therefore be it resolved that the San Francisco Labor Council defends the right of journalists and whistleblowers and opposes prosecution which could affect all whistleblowers in the U.S. and we can see also countries like Australia. Be it finally resolved that the San Francisco Labor Council urges our representatives to oppose the criminal prosecution of Julian Assange for whistleblowing activities, and will forward this for community for concurrence by our affiliated bodies, including the AFL-CIO. My own observations I'd like to add. I urge the people, especially journalists and publishers, to close ranks in supporting Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Reality Winner, and other heroic journalists and publishers who are being severely punished for revealing war crimes by people on the front lines of our interventionist wars and the people in high places whose cultural ignorance and inhumanity were responsible for those undeclared, disastrous, and destabilizing wars. Unfortunately, the same pattern of bureaucratic injustice prevails. Instead of prosecuting those who commit crimes against humanity, instead, the brave people who expose those war crimes are being prosecuted. Remember Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's reaction to the torture. Thank you. Rumsfeld's reaction to the torture and humiliation of the prisoners at Abu Ghraib. He was much more concerned with the leak and expressed no sympathy whatsoever for the people being victimized in this terrible situation. To prosecute journalists and whistleblowers who expose war crimes rather than the criminals who commit them is, in my view, an absolute moral failure and perversion of law and justice. Working people of the world have no greater allies than courageous journalists and whistleblowers who pay dearly for doing their jobs conscientiously and humanely. I join people throughout the world in opposing Assange's extradition, but strongly support extraditing terrorist criminals like Alien Abrams to Nicaragua to stand trial for his role in the crimes against the Nicaraguan people during the era of U.S.-sponsored counterterrorism, and war criminal Henry Kissinger to Chile for his role in the murder and overthrow of democratically elected President Salvador Allende. Also, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney to the International Criminal Court in The Hague for their crimes against humanity in Afghanistan and Iraq. Support heroic journalists and whistleblowers and prosecute war criminals in high places and on the front lines of our unjust, undeclared, and interventionist wars. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And thanks for letting us know again about who the real war criminals are. There's so many, and they seem to never die. I mean, Kissinger goes on and on. That's they're always around. I mean, they bring them back. They bring them back decades after they're committed war crimes to do more war crimes. That's really why the working people in this country and a number of union leaders have called for it, and we need a general strike in this country. We need to shut the United States down. During the shutdown of Trump, of the government, the president of the airline flight attendants called for a shutdown, a general strike against the conditions in this country. And also the vice president of the ATU, Bruce Hamilton, has called for a general strike. I mean, I think we need a general strike to say enough is enough. Enough is enough, because this government is not representing anyone other than the billionaires. That's what we're talking about. This government represents the wealthy. They talk about reforming it. They are part of the problem. How can they reform it? The Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Feinstein, Kamala Harris, they themselves are part of the problem. And we discussed at a previous rally for Julian Assange right here in San Francisco. They've been poisoning the people of Hunters Point and Treasure Island. They're building condos in a radioactive dump in San Francisco at Hunters Point and Treasure Island. Imagine that, building condos in a radioactive dump. Why are they doing that? They're doing it for profit. They want to profit, make money by building condos. And they spent over $1 billion, $1 billion to remediate and to do testing. They falsified the testing. Is this a national story, $1 billion? How about $1 billion for the poor people in San Francisco in this country? The people that can't get health care, the people that can't go to school because they don't have enough money. That's where our dollars should be going. But instead, they spent $1 billion. Nancy Pelosi's husband was involved in building the condos. Nancy Pelosi's cousin, Lawrence Pelosi, was involved in Lennar, the developer. Kamala Harris was district attorney in San Francisco when they were firing whistleblowers who worked for Tetra Tech. When there's a cancer epidemic right here in San Francisco, which has been covered up. These African American and other people who have gotten cancer in San Francisco is because of the criminality of these politicians who are supposed to be representing people, but they don't. They represent the billionaires. They want more money from profiteering. This is what this is about. The business of war is a business. That is what war is about. That's what Julian Assange was exposing. These criminal wars are about making business, making money off the bodies, off the destruction of the world and the climate. I mean, let's dig for more oil. Let's have more gas, more freedom carbons, as they call it. These are insane. This is the insanity of capitalism. Another insanity is the Abe government, which wants to have the Olympics in Fukushima. I mean, which says they've decontaminated Fukushima, even though you have 4 nuclear reactors where you have melted nuclear rods, they can't even remove them 8 years after the disaster. But he wants to have the Olympics in Fukushima. The fact of the matter is, the insanity of capitalism is reflected in these people who run the United States. It's reflected in the people who run Britain and run Japan. These people are insane. They're literally insane. Why in San Francisco would you build condos on a radioactive dump? You have to be insane. Other than profit, it's for the money. It's for the money. But that insanity of this system is what's driving people to profitize and to make money off of insanity. And that's exactly what they're doing. So we're saying, free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Jail the real war criminals. Jail the real war criminals. Jail the real war criminals. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Now, if you want to go find out more about our committee, we have a website. It's on the flyers that are being handed out. Bay Action Committee to Free Julian Assange. And we are going to have other events. And next month, we're going to have a forum on Julian Assange. And it's in the Labor Fest Bulletin. And we're going to have journalists and others, because we have to spread this out. We have to educate people. Most American people don't know who Julian Assange is. They don't understand. Yes. Well, the sister here asked about the low-income housing. What happened is that Hunters Point was a naval shipyard that was bringing contaminated ships from Bikini Islands, the Marshall Islands. This government wanted to test if ships could be recommissioned after a bomb blast, a nuclear bomb blast. So they were putting ships in the Marshall Islands where nuclear blasts were taking place, and then they were towing the ships to San Francisco to the Hunters Point shipyard. And they were having African-American workers, mostly African-Americans, sandblast the radioactive material, which ended up in the bay. They built the first nuclear radiological laboratory for animals, and they were testing human beings on radiation at Hunters Point shipyard. So there's a cancer epidemic in the community. And now they want to build condos on, they are building condos on Treasure Island, and they're covering it up. Nancy Pelosi just got $42 million in the last reconciliation bill to spend more money on remediation and cleanup after they spent $1 billion, and it was done in fraud. They fired 6 workers at Tetra Tech who exposed the fraud. See, the real criminals are right here. We don't have to look far. Right here, right in this building. That's where the real world criminals are. And Nancy Pelosi has covered this up because she's benefiting personally from the building condos on a nuclear radioactive dump. How mad can you get? How crazy can you get? She wouldn't want to live on Hunters Point or Treasure Island. Treasure Island was a base. They have a ship there that they built, the Navy built, called the Pandemonium. That was the name of the ship. And what did? They trained Navy personnel on what to do in a nuclear war, how to save themselves. So this is really what's going on. And they want to build, right now in Treasure Island, we're going to have a press conference on Tuesday at noon. And they've got a charter school. They've got a charter school, and they're moving this dirt, contaminated dirt around in Treasure Island. The mime troupe has a play on July 4th. Everyone should be there. July 4th, Dolores Park. And the play is called Treasure Island. And it's about the fraud and corruption in Treasure Island. So we should be out there with Julian Assange material. There'll be a couple of thousand people. We should be at Dolores Park on July the 4th talking to people and explaining to them what's going on with Julian Assange. Because the cover-up at Treasure Island, it epitomizes the real criminals, how they've allowed this development. They spent $1 billion of our money to clean up, supposedly clean up a radioactive contaminated site. And it covered up, and people are in jail because of it. And the people who have allowed it is Nancy Pelosi. The people who have allowed it is Kamala Harris. The people who have allowed it is Dianne Feinstein. The people who have allowed it is Gavin Newsom. The people who have allowed it is our mayor, London Breed, who's responsible for this. London Breed's first job was in Treasure Island, helping along the development of Treasure Island. That's our mayor, London Breed. So she's aware. Even her own relatives have gotten cancer as a result of what was going on in Hunters Point. So you see about the craziness of this system, that the mayor of the city, she knows that Hunters Point is dangerous, but she's encouraging the continued development of that Hunters Point and Treasure Island. And again, we have to free Julian Assange. We have to free Chelsea Manning. We have to demand justice for the human beings in this country, the human beings right here in San Francisco. And we were successful in freeing one human being, one woman right here at this rally, who they're arresting for what? What were they arresting for? The homeless, the people who don't have a place to live in San Francisco? That's really what's going on right here. People don't have a place to live, they don't have health care, and they're arresting poor people. When the billionaires get away scot-free, the billionaires get tax subsidies. That's really what's going on. That's what Barack Obama did. This is a Democrat or Republican, black or white, gay or white, it really doesn't matter. It's who you represent, your class. No other speakers. I want to thank you all for joining us. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Jail the real war criminals. Jail the real war criminals. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Thank you, WikiLeaks. Thank you, WikiLeaks. Okay. If everyone who spoke could give me their name, we'll put your captions on the video that we do. So everyone who spoke, if you give me your name, we'll put the captions on the video. Or give it.
Do you have some kind of information like that little